Good afternoon, my name is Ella Cobb, and I wrote my final project on women's suffrage. First, the table of contents. First is the introduction with my thesis statement. Next is roots, then key players, then the struggles, then the eventual outcome, then the conclusion, and lastly, works cited. First, the introduction. This will include a basis of what I will be focusing on in this presentation. Here's my thesis statement. The analysis of women's suffrage unveils its roots in the 19th century societal movements, highlighting the relentless struggle led by key figures such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, culminating in the eventual outcome of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote in the United States. Next is the roots, and it will include an analysis of the roots of women's suffrage. First is the Enlightenment ideas. During the 18th century Enlightenment period, notions of equality and individual rights gained prominence, sparking discussions about the women's rights and their exclusion from political participation. Next is the abolitionist movements. Women's involvement in the abolitionist movement in the 19th century exposed them to activism and raised questions about their own rights, leading to the emergence of feminist voices. Global influence. Women's suffrage movements had international dimensions. Examples include the women's suffrage movement in the United Kingdom and New Zealand, granting women the right to vote in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which inspired movements elsewhere in the world. Industrial Revolution. The changing societal landscape due to industrialization brought more women into the workforce, leading to the increased calls for representation and rights. Leaders in advocacy. Figures like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, and others played pivotal roles in advocating for women's suffrage through speeches, writings, and organized campaigns. Next, resistance and opposition. Despite the growing movement, women's suffrage faced significant opposition from conservative groups, politicians, and those who believed in maintaining the status quo. Next, here's a picture of women's suffrage protest, and the sign reads, "Self-supporting women." Understanding the roots provided in the last slide provides insight into the multi-faced origins of the women's suffrage movement and the complex societal changes that influenced its development and eventual success. The next topic that I will be on is the key players, also known as people, in women's suffrage. These will just be a few, but there were many women who led to the 19th Amendment and other women's rights. First is Susan B. Anthony, a prominent suffragist and women's rights advocate. Anthony co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association and played a crucial role in advancing the movement through her tireless activism and organizing skills. Next is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was an influential figure in the women's rights movement. Stanton co-organized the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 and contributed significantly to early feminist movement through her writings and advocacy for suffrage and gender equality. Next is Lucy Stone. She was an influential suffragist and abolitionist. Stone was known for her advocacy through speeches and writings. She founded the American Woman Suffrage Association, advocating for state-by-state suffrage reforms. Lastly was Ida B. Wells. While primarily known for her anti-lynching and civil rights activism, Wells was also a supporter of women's suffrage. She highlighted the intersectionality of race and gender in the fight for equal rights. Next are the struggles. This will include the struggles for women's suffrage that involve numerous challenges and obstacles that the movement had to overcome. Here's a picture And I captioned it, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," because we don't know what was really going on in this picture. And we can only guess, because we can't go back in time. Here is some of the struggles faced by women. These were not all, as I said, just some. Legal barriers, social and cultural norms, opposition from anti-suffrage groups, political opposition, strategic challenges, economic barriers, divisions within the movement, public perception and media opposition, repression and arrests, and long campaign durations. Next is the eventual outcome of women's suffrage. Here are just 3 of the things that came from women's suffrage. First is the 19th Amendment. The culmination of suffrage movement in the United States resulted in the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution on August 18, 1920, granting women the constitutional right to vote. Political participation. With the right to vote secured, women began actively participating in the political process, registered to vote, and engaging in elections at local, state, and federal laws. Next is a rise in women in politics. Women's suffrage movements had international dimensions. Examples include the women's suffrage movement in the United Kingdom and New Zealand, granting the right to vote in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which inspired movements elsewhere. In conclusion, to sum it all up, the fight for women's suffrage emerged from the 19th century societal movements driven by prominent leaders like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Their tireless efforts led to the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, marking a significant milestone as it granted women the right to vote in the United States. Last but not least is my works cited. And here it is. Thank you.